Good morning, everybody. Today, in the academic lecture series, we are going to deal with the second lecture in surgery, and the topic is approach to the intestinal obstruction and perforation. In surgical practice, intestinal obstruction and intestinal perforation are quite common, and a surgeon has to deal with the intestinal obstruction and intestinal perforation many times in his entire practice. A surgeon as a specialist has to deal with the conditions like intestinal obstruction and perforation, but even a general practitioners or even anybody working in the emergency ward or in the casualties of the hospitals like medical officers, they also have to deal with such kind of the conditions in the initial phases. A patient will directly go to any clinic or any casualty or any emergency department of any big hospital with certain symptoms of intestinal obstruction and perforation, and the clinician who is present there, the clinician may be a surgeon or the clinician may be other than the surgical branch, maybe a resident medical officer, has to understand the gravity of the situation and he has to diagnose the condition properly. He may have to do the initial management also, and the further decisions he may have to take the expert help from the surgical specialist or the surgical gastroenterology specialist, depending on the condition of the patient. So what is this intestinal obstruction and intestinal perforation? Actually, intestinal perforation is a separate topic, intestinal obstruction is a separate topic. Whenever we study the intestines, we study small bowel, we study large bowel separately, we study rectum and anal canal separately. But whenever it comes to a clinical condition, it comes in total under bowel and bowel obstruction or bowel perforation. Even in case of the intestinal diseases, the disease may be of the small intestine, disease may be of the large intestine, or even the disease may be of the rectum anal canal also. In many conditions of the diseases of the bowel, somewhere the clinical features are close to either intestinal obstruction or in certain circumstances it may be of intestinal perforation. So it's a clinical entity. It's a clinical entity. It is not a specific disease. Specific disease will be different. And that particular clinical entity can have various causes, and those causes has to be found. Those causes has to be properly treated if you want the good outcomes in the patients of intestinal obstruction or perforation. So all of you, being the basic medical graduates or postgraduates, know what bowel is, what is meant by small bowel, what is meant by large bowel, as the anatomical part of the gastrointestinal tract. The interesting fact before going into this topic is that the entire gastrointestinal tract is a luminal structure. It's having a lumen. with a specific diameter, and the diameter varies from part to part. So the lumen, it's a luminal structure. The lumen has one end and the other end, the proximal and the distal, the endpoints. And in between those endpoints, this luminal structure is traveling. It is arranged anatomically, and it is functioning there. So this luminal structure itself has its own characteristics. So the lumen, its diameter, certain valves, certain sphincters, then the demarcation lines in between the two parts, like for example esophagus and stomach, there is a demarcation. Stomach and the small intestine, there is a demarcation. Small intestine and the large intestine, there is a demarcation point. Various such demarcations, and those demarcations are defining the individuality of that particular part. So the point of demarcation, the part proximal to it, the part distal to it, the part proximal will be having certain specific characteristics, will be having certain specific functions. The part which is distal will be having certain specific characteristics, certain specific functions. But anatomically those are connected. Anatomically there is a channel. But when this particular channel is formed, when this particular lumen is formed, it's a lumen with a wall. It's wall, there is wall there. The wall has certain characteristics. It's not a solid organ like liver, it's not a solid organ like spleen. It contains liquid and air inside. And it has a wall. And this particular diameter of that particular part, the characteristics of the walls of the individual part contribute to the anatomical integrity as well as the functional organization of the particular gastrointestinal tract. Means if there is something going wrong with the walls, if there is something going wrong with the diameters, then there will be alteration of the function, there will be alteration in the anatomical integrity, and that can create a disease process. So logically speaking, in case of the intestines or in case of any part of GI for that matter, is the component which is in the lumen, intraluminal and extraluminal, which is not in the lumen. So in the lumen, extrinsic, external, and in the wall, intramural. So such classification is very important. It has its own value in diagnosis. It has its own value in therapeutics. So whenever we talk about the gastrointestinal tract, especially when we talk about in reference to the today's topics, that is small bowel, large bowel, or intestinal obstruction and intestinal perforation, these all factors which we clinically describe or which we theoretically also describe has its own value in deciding the further treatments or even in the diagnosis also. Now, what intestinal obstruction or what intestinal perforation means and why this topic is clubbed together. See, whenever any patient will come to you or whenever any patient comes to you, patient will tell you the symptom. Patient will not tell you that I have intestinal obstruction, I have intestinal perforation. No, it will never happen. Except the person is a doctor. Means a patient coming with any symptoms of intestines, related to intestines, will be having certain specific symptom. And the patient will come to the medical setup with that particular symptom, differing in severity, case to case. Differing in severity, case to case. Means a person can have mild pain in abdomen, a person can have moderate pain in abdomen, a person can have severe pain in abdomen. A person can have vomiting, person can have loose motions, person can have something like hematemesis, or any person can have the condition like severe vomiting. It all depends how the severity of the condition is. Now, a person with mild symptoms can go to the clinic. He may wait in the OPD and he can go to the doctor and tell, okay, I have certain these symptoms. You may find that the symptoms are mild, the symptoms are not very severe, and you can decide the further evaluation of the patient. You can take a detailed history of the patient for that matter. You can give proper time, you can ask so many questions to the patient, and patient may answer you also. This is one kind of the presentation which can happen. But when the condition is acute, and it many times whatever I described just before some time, that is a chronic condition, that can be a chronic condition. But when the condition is acute, when the patient has got severe pain in abdomen or patient has profuse vomiting, in that condition they will be having very less time to take the history of the patient. The patient cannot wait in the OPD waiting room just to see the doctor for some hours. He cannot wait for hours. He requires an immediate attraction. He requires immediate attention. So it is very important in the medical setups where any kind of case can come, there the staff there or the maybe some receptions or receptionist kind of people or ward-wise kind of people, they should be given a orientation or they should be made aware that okay, if any such patient comes, it has to be immediately shifted to the casualty, or the patient has to be immediately shifted to the person who can immediately take care of the patient. Means this kind of the patient cannot keep on waiting in the wards, waiting in the OPD waiting rooms. So when such severe presentation comes, then immediately you have to assess the patient, and after the initial assessment you will not be having much time. Okay, tell me all the history of the patient, tell me all the history, how it happened and why it happened, because when the patient is crying out of the pain, he will not be in a condition to give the answers of n number of your questions. So though the history taking is important, you have to practically see whether it is possible there in the patient. No. In that condition, what important thing is for you is that you need to just see what best you can do at that particular spot to the patient so as to relieve the condition of the patient. Means what is the main important thing, that patient is dehydrated, patient is having pain, patient is having severe vomiting. So what you need to do, you need to first initially manage that. So get rid of the patient's pain, give such drugs where the pain of the patient will get relieved, where the vomiting can stop, where the distension of the abdomen is there, where the distension will be relieved. So the condition which is causing the discomfort, the symptom which is causing the discomfort, that symptom has to be properly treated first. At the same time, you can take some history from the patient's relatives, but patient's relatives may not be in a position to give you all the history, because many details will be with the patients only. So okay, so to certain extent the patient's relatives will be useful to you. You can take the history from the patient's relatives and you can have some provisional idea in your mind that what can be the possible cause in that particular patient. Now, the intestinal obstruction or intestinal perforations are always acute, because intestinal perforations cannot remain in a chronic condition, because suddenly there is perforation, suddenly there is the efflux of the contents, the symptoms of peritonitis, and the patient can have a severe pain and it will be acute condition. In the conditions like intestinal obstruction, the condition can remain chronic, and many times it happens that that becomes a diagnostic challenge. Now, how that becomes a diagnostic challenge, we will discuss it also. So, this chronicity of the intestinal obstruction, sometimes there will be combination of intestinal obstruction and perforation. Patient may present with intestinal perforation as an acute condition, but if you see the underlying cause or underlying associated, you can find some chronic thing, some chronic mass, some chronic stricture which is there in the intestine and which has aggravated this perforation. Some chronic ulcer, some chronic duodenal ulcer, and suddenly perforated. And it becomes a diagnostic challenge also. The clinical sense, the clinical evaluation, or the clinical approach is one very important key in the diagnosis of these particular patients. And if the clinical sense is not used properly, if the clinical examination is not used properly, is not aggressively evaluated, then the condition can become serious and you may lose the patient. Why? These conditions, if those are not diagnosed accurately, if the condition, underlying condition is severe, and if you are not very much keen about it, if you are not very much serious about it, and if you keep on waiting, then there can be some irreversible damage, and that irreversible damage cannot be taken back. Patient, you cannot take back the patient from that condition. Means, suppose there is ongoing intestinal ischemia, just I want to give the exact example. If there is ongoing intestinal ischemia, and if you are not clinically aware that there can be ongoing intestinal ischemia, that under ongoing ischemia can lead to the infarction, and that can cause the severe sepsis and severe intra-abdominal problem, and the patient can die because of the complications of the condition. Just take the small example of urinary output. It is common in the surgical practice that the patients with intestinal obstruction or intestinal perforation or any intra-abdominal sepsis for that matter are very much prone to renal failure. Now, what is the best way to diagnose renal failure? Clinically, nothing else. Just see the output of the patient. Just see the urine output. Now, if the patient has come to you with any such condition, and if you are not aware that what is the urine output in first 3 hours, then next 3 hours, next 3 hours, means the repeated evaluation of the urine output. So now, in case if the patient is not catheterized, so it is difficult for you to get the idea exactly how much urine the patient has passed. Practically it is difficult, because every time to take it in a container and exactly measure it, it is sometimes there can be errors in that. But if you have a catheter, Foley's catheter placed to the patient, and if you see the output of the patient, urine output of the patient, say urine output in the first 1 hour after admission, if the patient is admitted at say afternoon 1 o'clock, then what is out up to 2 o'clock? And if such chart is maintained, then you will get the idea, okay, there is a urine output which is present, but now the urine output has reduced. So in these 2 hours the urine output has reduced. In these 3 hours the urine output has reduced. And if the urine output is reducing, it does mean that either there is some problem with the management or the patient is going in renal failure. Even if you manage it properly, because these conditions are known to cause renal failure as a complication. So even if you manage properly, they can aggravate, the renal failure can aggravate, and you may have to use the drugs like diuretics so as to take the patient out from the renal failure. But in time administration of the diuretics can save the kidneys of the patient, provided you are giving the proper IV fluids in a proper quantity as required to the patient. Means this early detection in the clinical scenario, early detection in your wards, so examining the patients properly in the ward is one of the very important key in this particular approach. There can be very interesting findings. Just take the very small example of the pulse of the patient. And many times pulse is such an important indicator that if the pulse of the patient is increasing, means if there is tachycardia, that tachycardia is one of the important sign as far as whether the patient is having any ongoing ischemia or any ongoing sepsis to the patient. Very important indicator. If in short, pulse is the indicator whether the patient is worsening or the patient is improving. So any intra-abdominal sepsis, any intestinal obstruction or any case of the problem with the intestine, and if the patient's pulse rate is increasing, say suppose for example initially the pulse rate of the patient was 80, then it turned 90, then it turned 100, now it is say 120. It's an alarming sign that the patient's pulse rate has become 120, because 120 pulse rate is not a small thing. It is an indicator. So whenever such conditions are there, whenever such indicators, clinical indicators are suggesting that the underlying condition is worsening, in that condition the surgeon or the clinician who is attending the patient has to be very alert, and he has to take the decisions very fast. He cannot just keep on waiting, because your waiting can cause the further complications to the patient. Now, one of the very important factors as far as the intestines are concerned is that the diagnostic limitations of the tests. Means the routine test which is done in case of the intestinal obstructions or any abdominal, say actually abdominal pain also, is the first basic test what nowadays we do is the ultrasonography of the abdomen. Ultrasonography of the abdomen. X-ray of the abdomen in standing position, this is also another test. But routine ultrasonography of the abdomen is not that sensitive and that specific as far as the diagnosis of the bowel is concerned. It is good for the solid organs. But whenever it comes to bowel, there is a diagnostic limitation as far as the ultrasonography is concerned. And you can get a report in such a way that okay, there is a possibility of this, or the radiologist may comment that there are the dilated segments of the bowel, and dilated segments of the bowel, either large bowel, small bowel, or whatever, and correlate clinically. So once again, it becomes correlate clinically. The next one of the important test is the X-rays. Now once again, barium has its own limitations. There are contraindications for the barium as far as the intestinal obstruction and perforation are concerned. So it becomes the X-ray of the abdomen. Now in X-ray of the abdomen, you can find the specific findings like the gas fluid levels in case of the intestinal obstruction, or ground glass appearance in case of the intestinal perforation, dilated loops of the bowel in case of the intestinal obstruction. You can find specific, like for example the sigmoid loop. In case of the volvulus, you can find the sigmoid loop. But X-ray will not be able to completely tell you whether this case is of the conservative management, of the surgical management every time. Okay, if there is a condition like volvulus, yes. If there is a condition like perforation, definitely you can think to open the abdomen and go ahead. But every time X-ray cannot tell you. Then once again it becomes a clinical judgment. Now the clinical condition is once again becomes difficult whenever there is a combination of intestinal obstruction and perforation. Means for example, it is called as strangulation. So perforation can be the further effect of the strangulation. So when in intestinal obstruction, especially when it is a closed loop obstruction, because if there are many kind of clinical varieties you can see, and there is one such variety is the closed loop obstruction. Means one segment and other segment, and there is one narrow ring, and that segment has come up and that has become the closed loop. Now the very interesting fact with this closed loop is that the narrow ring which is there, which forms the neck, and that closed loop there, that can compromise the vascularity because of the increase in this particular pressure in that particular segment of the bowel. So there will be, mainly initial stages, there will be first problem with the venous circulation. So afterwards there will be the condition like ischemia. So when this particular segment, because of the disturbed mesenteric circulation, impaired mesenteric circulation, when that becomes necrosed, it is called it can be called a strangulated bowel. And that strangulated bowel, when it becomes necrosed, it can cause perforation. Now this strangulation you can see either in the conditions like hernia, because strangulated hernias are more common. So you can see the loop of the bowel which is coming into the say inguinal region or femoral region, either a inguinal hernia or a femoral hernia, and that loop has strangulated hernias. But when that strangulation is there for persisting for a long time, it can cause perforation. And such kind of the strangulation even can happen inside also, internal hernias happening in the abdomen. These are internal hernias which are happening that at the point where there is the narrowing, and when the loop is coming from that narrowing, in case of the internal herniations, or it can be because of the intestinal adhesions also. Even adhesions also can cause complicated adhesions which are happening because of the previous surgery, and in between the two adhesions the bowel loop has been trapped. You can see such conditions many times, and that particular loop becomes strangulated, and when strangulated it perforates. The next stage is perforation. Now what happens, if the patient comes with the acute abdomen, the presentation will be of the intestinal perforation. Even the picture will be of the intestinal perforation, severe tenderness, severe rigidity, severe pain in abdomen, and the X-ray findings of perforation also. And in such condition, when the perforation is there, initially you feel that it is a case of perforation, no doubt it is a case of perforation, but the cause is the strangulated obstruction. So such combination of intestinal obstruction and perforation, these conditions can complicate the picture. So whenever you talk about the intestinal obstruction, it all depends upon the mechanism how it happens. So especially when you talk about the intestinal obstruction, there is some basic classification which is done. The basic classification is a dynamic and aerodynamic. So the dynamic means any cause which is causing either the intrinsic or extrinsic compression, it is causing obstruction because of any mechanistic effect. And aerodynamic, which is happening because of any physiological problem like paralytic illness. That is a basic classification we can see in this regard. Now, when any patient is coming to you with intestinal obstruction, you should be able to first decide whether this case is of the intestinal obstruction. Now what can be the signs and symptoms of the intestinal obstruction? Symptoms can vary. How they can vary? Okay, initially the patient can tell, look, I only have constipation. I have constipation. In case of the large bowel obstruction, main symptom will be constipation for many days, and then followed by the pain in abdomen, then followed by vomiting. When it is in obstruction with the upper part of the GI tract, then the symptoms will be of more of the vomiting. The symptom can be of the pain in abdomen. So vomiting followed by pain in abdomen, or pain in abdomen followed by vomiting, anything can be there. So such symptoms, the patient comes to you, and distension of the abdomen is one of the features which depends upon how long it is present. Every time initially there will not be distension. Distension will not happen immediately, because initially the reaction of the bowel is the hyperperistalsis, and after hyperperistalsis then the later reaction is the hypoperistalsis. Means so that the distension should happen, the process of peristalsis should reduce, or there should be a ileus. Means if the condition is there for some hours or maybe some days also, in that condition there will be afterwards there will be distension of the abdomen. So distension of the abdomen initially is not every time the first feature. When distension of the abdomen will be there, if suppose the condition is chronic obstruction because of any masses, intestinal malignancies, large intestinal malignancies, And that large intestinal malignancy may be along with associated ascites. In that condition, the patient may come to with the main symptom as a distension of the abdomen. It can happen. This clinical picture also can be there. But in acute conditions, such picture will not be there. So distension will happen later. Now distension, pain in abdomen, vomiting, distension of the abdomen, and constipation and obstipation, absolute constipation. These are the certain classical clinical symptoms which you can come across. And when you examine the patient, you can elicit the tenderness. You can find out how much is the distension by measuring the abdominal girth. You can find out exactly what is the cause of the distension by doing the proper percussion, because of, if there is a dull note, it is a fluid. If there is a resonant note, it is a air, means bowel. If the patient is having paralytic ileus, you can auscultate it by means of the stethoscope, and you can say that okay, there is hyperperistalsis present or there is hypoperistalsis present. And vomiting, you can definitely see the patient will be having vomiting, and the constipation which the patient tells you. And other part of the detailed clinical examination of the abdomen, like inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation in detail. So this clinical examination, inspection, palpation, percussion, auscultation, along with the history of the patient, along with the chief complaints which are there, and not to forget the associated symptoms also, because associated symptoms should not be taken lightly. Sometimes the patient tells very different symptoms, and you cannot, that may not attract your attention. For example, patient tells you that okay, I have pain in abdomen, vomiting and all these things, but since last some months I had postprandial fullness. Now postprandial fullness, what we term it, but patient can tell in its own language. Means what he may tell that okay, I was having, after having food I was getting immediately the fullness. I was not able to have more food. Even after taking some 1/4 of the chapati also, I used to feel my stomach is full and my appetite is substantially reduced. Substantially reduced. Such kind of the picture may tell you. And afterwards the patient has landed in the symptom like vomiting, and afterwards the patient had landed in the symptom like pain in abdomen. Such kind of the picture will be there. Now when such symptom like postprandial fullness is there, it may happen that you may not give the more importance to it, but it has a substantial value. Any mass which is happening at the ileocecal junction, any pathology which is happening at the ileocecal junction, or any pathology which is happening maybe in the proximal part of the small intestine, or maybe in the duodenum, or especially at the gastric outlet, all these pathologies which are there can cause the partial intestinal obstruction. And here patient immediately will not be having all the symptoms of the intestinal obstruction. Slowly patient immediately will not be having vomiting and pain in abdomen and distension, all the symptoms. So initially loss of appetite, postprandial fullness, discomfort in the abdomen, heaviness in the abdomen, weight loss. If there is some condition like ileocecal cox, there can be weight loss. Now weight loss will be the feature of the patient. Now this weight loss may be associated symptoms to the patient, but it cannot be neglected, because that can give you the real diagnostic idea. If the patient is having weight loss, okay, whether it is a case of ileocecal cox. If the patient is having weight loss, whether it is like malignancy. If suppose there is weight loss, if there is any gastric outlet obstruction due to any extrinsic or any intramural cause, such things you have to think while approaching the particular patient. So it all depends how you take the history of the patient. If you take the accurate history of the patient, then if you give proper time to the patient, if you analyze each and every symptom, there are very high chances that you can have the accurate diagnosis and you can take the appropriate decisions of the patient. Because early outcomes, see, if you miss the diagnosis, say of the colonic malignancies, maybe any GI malignancy for that matter, and if that leads to metastasis, then definitely the prognosis will turn very bad. But that if you diagnose that condition in the early stages, then okay, you can take the immediate decision of surgical excision of that particular mass, anastomosis, and because of you have picked up the condition in the early stages, before the stage of the regional metastasis, early stage of the TNM classification, early stage of TNM classification. If you pick up it, then the prognosis of the patient can be good. Also, it all depends upon the even the type of the cancer. But early diagnosis is the key anywhere. Ileocecal Cox. Patient can nicely get recovered by means of the proper anti-tubercular therapy. Means these kind of the associated symptoms like weight loss or associated symptom like postprandial illness or associated symptom like abdominal discomfort. It happens sometimes that the patient will not be having symptom as such. For example, if there is any large tumor in the abdomen, and if suppose that tumor is arising other than the area from the small bowels, from the GI tract, it is arising from some other area. And if it is giving compression on the intestine, see what happens many times when we deal with the patients which are from the tribal areas or from the rural areas, and especially from the low socioeconomic class conditions, they come with the symptoms of the intestinal obstruction, and when you examine, you find some big mass in the abdomen. And when you ask to the patients or patient's relative why you were waiting for so many days, then they may tell you their reasons, but there may be some financial reasons. And the very important thing here, they tell that okay, those was not creating me more trouble. Those was I was feeling the mass. I was feeling that there is some problem with my stomach, but I was not having more symptoms of it. And now I am getting the symptoms. Means presence of symptoms or aggravation of that particular symptom is one of very important key why the patient seeks your attention. If the people who are educated enough or the people who are aware enough about it, about their health, they come to you early. But the people who are not aware also and who are not maybe not much educated also, or maybe certain financial or the circumstantial reasons also, they may come to you late. And when that specific condition, suppose extrinsic compression on the bowel, when that compression is so much that it is causing the obstruction to the flow of the passage, in that condition the patients come to you. So, clinically when the patients come to you and when you approach to the patient, you have to consider many such factors. It is not immediately going into the details of that particular diagnosis. It is first how to reach to that diagnosis. Means whether the condition is basically intestinal obstruction or basically intestinal perforation. If it is intestinal, the cause is of the pain in abdomen. See, pain in abdomen is having the differential diagnosis where there are n number of causes. Vomiting is having the differential diagnosis where there are n number of causes. Even the distension of the abdomen is having the differential diagnosis where there are n number of causes. Now as a clinician you need to find out whether this particular symptom, it may be a pain in abdomen, it may be a distension, it may be vomiting, whether it comes in the domain of intestinal obstruction or perforation or it is other than intestinal obstruction or perforation. So that also you have to see. So that is possible by means of the clinical examination. Means if you do a proper clinical examination by inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation, you will be able to find out whether the cause is arising somewhere from liver, whether the cause is arising somewhere from the pancreas, whether the cause is arising somewhere from the kidneys, whether the cause is arising somewhere from the spleen, whether the cause is arising somewhere from the stomach or from the urinary bladder or from the gallbladder or any other organ. So this finding, this clinical examination of the 9 quadrants, the way we classify in our clinical examination of the abdomen, and these 9 quadrants examination can give you the idea that whether this disease is arising from, the condition is arising from the GI tract or other than GI tract. It can happen if the patient, for example, the patient of acute pancreatitis, take for that matter. A patient of acute pancreatitis, that is also one of the cause of the acute abdomen. It can also lead to intra-abdominal sepsis. Now this acute pancreatitis can come with the pain in abdomen, it can come with the vomiting, even it can come with the distension of the abdomen also, because secondarily it can cause the paralytic ileus, even cholecystitis, acute cholecystitis, it can cause the intra-abdominal sepsis. And secondary to intra-abdominal sepsis, it can cause the paralytic ileus. So here you should be very much careful in diagnosis, because you should not diagnose a case of cholecystitis or a case of acute pancreatitis as intestinal obstruction, because that will be a adynamic cause. That can be caused in the criteria of adynamic. There you need not have to do primarily anything for that intestine. You have to treat the basic cause. So here there lies the importance of the differential diagnosis, and this differential diagnosis you can properly do or properly perform if you know how to do the clinical examination. What are the signs? What are the signs of the acute cholecystitis? What are the signs of the acute hepatitis? What are the signs of the acute pancreatitis? Even for that matter, take the example of appendicitis. Very interestingly, in the clinical practice, you can find that a patient presenting with the case of acute appendicitis, and acute appendicitis can cause the regional inflammatory area in that right iliac fossa surrounding it, and because of that inflammation in the right iliac fossa, as a reaction to it, there can be a paralytic ileus. There can be sluggish peristalsis, and here you may confuse that whether this is a case of intestinal obstruction, because you may find distension of the abdomen, because in certain conditions, in certain circumstances, not always, but sometimes, the cases of acute appendicitis can give rise to the intestinal features of intestinal obstruction. A condition like intestinal distension, and you may confuse. Even if you may find the gas fluid levels also, but when you open the abdomen, you will find that the primary pathology is lying at the right iliac fossa, and that is acute appendicitis. So here, your proper palpation in the right iliac fossa, your proper finding, if there is a radiological, if you want to do investigation of also, who can focus on the right iliac fossa, by properly finding the signs of the acute appendicitis, exactly palpating at the McBurney's point, finding what is happening at the McBurney's point, and typically, if you are experienced enough, you can definitely diagnose that this is a condition going in favor of the acute appendicitis. Even sometimes there will be a condition like gallstone ileus, a gallstone which is there in the gallbladder, which can come down and which can enter into the intestine, and that gallstone can cause paralytic ileus, and you may confuse why there is why there are the symptoms of the intestinal obstruction, why there is abdominal distension. In that condition, the cause can be the gallstone ileus. So, if you are properly examining the patient, because remember one thing always, because the suspicion should come in mind as far as the cause. Immediately you should not come to the conclusion, which is also called as the hasty conclusions. So, hasty conclusions can be detrimental to the diagnostic process. So, if you hastily see this is a case of intestinal obstruction, you may miss the condition like acute pancreatitis. So, sometimes the biochemical parameters like serum amylase, serum lipase can come to your help. So, you should be having idea that when you want to diagnose in between two conditions, which is the diagnostic test which can exactly tell that okay, this is not the cause. For example, serum lipase. Okay, that can exactly tell you whether this condition is lying in the category of acute pancreatitis or it is some other than acute pancreatitis. Again, when you diagnose the case, diagnostic tests are important. But when it is you are clinically sure and when it is the severe damn emergency, in that condition, for example, just take the example of the mesenteric vascular occlusions. The mesenteric vascular occlusion is such a condition which is so serious that this mesenteric vascular occlusion, it can be a venous or it can be arterial. It can substantially cause the problem to the bowel. It can cause the infarction of the bowel segment. It can be a big bowel segment also if it is a large artery, mesenteric artery. Even mesenteric venous thrombosis can cause the problem with the bowel. Now, when such large segment of the bowel, see now many times what happens is that the mesenteric vascular occlusions should be a clinical suspicion, because those are difficult to exactly see by means of the investigative test. So, if you consider the primary test, like for example ultrasonography or for example X-ray, you may not be able to pick up the mesenteric vascular occlusions, and you may have to go for the further test like CT scan. Now once again, the CT scan is such a thing, it also depends upon the availability. You can find many areas of our country where you will not find the CT scan machines available readily. Means for example, a district headquarter can have some CT scan machines, maybe 5, 10, 20, whatever. But a taluka headquarters or maybe a remote area which is say around 3 to 4 hours journey from the district headquarters may not be having the CT scan like machine, or even may not be having UAG also. Now in these conditions, where if you are running a clinical setup, if you are running a medical setup, and if you don't have a CT scan facility nearby, there the clinical suspicion matters. Because you cannot make a patient of intestinal ischemia to travel for 3-4 hours, investigate, then come back, and then you are going to operate. Because till that time the bowel will become non-viable and the patient will land in septic shock because of the toxins, and the patient will die because of the complications in that time lag. So it's a it's a golden hour, because if you diagnose, you have to save the patient, you have to approach very fast, you have to aggressively manage such conditions. For example, mesenteric vascular occlusions. If you have suspicion in mind, if you should get the suspicion in mind, and how will you get the suspicion in the mind? When you are going to see the patient clinically quite well. So you have to see the patient clinically. What is happening to the patient's pain, for example? If the patient is having pain in abdomen and in spite of giving the analgesics, the pain is increasing, very important sign. You have admitted the patient with the pulse rate of say 90, and after 1 hour you are evaluating the patient, and after 1 hour you are finding that the patient's pulse rate is going above 100. After 1 hour, once again you are finding that patient pulse rate is going above 110 also. It's an alarming sign. What is happening to the patient's respiration? See, whenever there is a distension of the abdomen, it can cause increase in the intra-abdominal pressure. And this increase in the intra-abdominal pressure can give its effect on the diaphragm, which will compromise with the respiratory compliance, and that can lead to dyspnea to the patient. And patient may feel that breathlessness, and if that breathlessness is increasing, now this breathlessness can increase because of the increase in the intra-abdominal pressure, as well as breathlessness can happen because of the secondary effects from that particular disease. Means, for example, if the patient is landing in the condition like sepsis, or if the patient is landing in the condition like acidosis, in that condition there will be secondary effect on the respiration of the patient. Patient's SpO2 may go down. So simple equipment like finger pulse oximeter, very simple equipment, easily available, and that finger pulse oximeter will tell you what is the pulse rate of the patient, what is the oxygen SpO2 of the patient. So we call it as oxygen saturation. Now if the oxygen saturation normally, when it should remain at the normal level 97, 98, 99, 100 say, and if that oxygen saturation on this particular machine like finger pulse oximeter is coming down like see 92, 90, 92, 90, 91, 88 like that, or still below than that, then that is the alarming sign, because it is causing the respiratory compromise. So tachycardias, alteration is in the blood pressures also. Sometimes initial phases the patient can land in the reactionary hypertension, and later they land in hypotension. So if when the patients go in the further stage of shock, it can be the shock because of the dehydration also, and it can be the shock because of the sepsis also. So septic shock as well as the hypovolemic shock. And in if that shock condition starts, then it is also reversible and irreversible. Then the BP will go down. So if a originally hypertensive patient having a blood pressure of say 150 baseline blood pressure with 150/90 or 140/90, and if the blood pressure of that patient is even though coming to 110 systolic, that is alarming because that is not normal in that particular patient, and that is a sign of hypotension. So as a routine parameter you may feel that this particular blood pressure is normal, but it may not be normal in that particular patient with hypertension. So this hypotension or tachycardia or decrease in the oxygen saturation or breathlessness or decrease in the urine output, very important marker of the renal failure, clinically I am talking about, is the urine output, what is coming out from that in that catheter. So if the urine output is decreasing, means there is reduction in the mean arterial blood pressure that is causing the renal failure to the patient, or there can be other cause like in abdominal compartment syndrome, and that is causing the compromise with the renal vasculature, renal circulation, and that is causing the decrease in the urine output. So very important but very basic, it's not difficult, anybody can see what is pulse rate, anybody can see what is output, anybody can see what is the blood pressure, especially the medical related persons. And you have to just measure for the respiratory rate, because alteration in the respiratory rate is very important, or there is abdominal girth by taking the proper measuring tape, by keeping the proper measuring tape, and if you see the abdominal girth is increasing by 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, whatever it is. So these are important parameters, clinical parameters, which can clinically tell you whether your patient is turning good or turning bad. Now, when you clinically approach these patients, basically you have to understand whether the condition is mild, moderate, severe. You have to understand whether the condition is acute, chronic or subacute. You have to understand the patient's history properly. You have to manage the emergency also, because if the patient lands in the emergency condition, you have to first manage it also, and simultaneously the history taking, or after initial management the proper history taking from maybe from the relatives. And when you do perform all this, so patient's history, then patient's complaints, patient's clinical examination, and when you do all this, you should have a list of differential diagnosis. So you should be able to find out what are the cardinal points in this particular patient. So as far as the patient's history is there, cardinal points, these are the cardinal points, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. As far as the patient's chief complaints are there, these are the important points. As far as the patient's examination is concerned, these are the important points. And in total, when you have made the case record of this particular patient, what is the point 1 that is going in favor of the diagnosis, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have to list in that way. After listing this, by properly assessing it, because see, theoretically you should have the differential diagnosis in your mind, you should have the clinical examination how it is done, and in specific condition what will be the finding of clinical examination. So if there is disease X in a differential diagnosis, for that disease X in a differential diagnosis, what should be the clinical examination finding, that also you should be aware about. And when you are aware about this, then you can have your diagnosis A, provisional diagnosis. Okay, so after going through all these details, I feel that this is the provisional diagnosis of the patient. And after provisional diagnosis, okay, now there can be such condition, okay, you may have a spot diagnosis. What is spot diagnosis? Okay, a strangulated hernia. And it doesn't need more investigations, because you can definitely see a inguinal hernia where, or any incisional hernia or any umbilical hernia where the bowels have come out, the bowels are not reducing and the bowels are getting strangulated, and there is severe pain in abdomen. So this will be a spot diagnosis. Here you need not have to go for diagnosis B, diagnosis C, and once again confirm the diagnosis. Such steps are not required. Here the diagnosis is a spot diagnosis. And when you diagnose, okay, this is a case of strangulated hernia, then what is the treatment? It has to be surgery only. There is no other treatment. And you should not waste too much time in the evaluation. If suppose the segment of the bowel is strangulated in the hernia, and if you are unnecessarily wasting your time in doing the CT scan so as to find out the further details, till you do perform the CT scan and take the further action of surgery, in that particular time delay, there will be more and more damage to the bowel. So this is a common sense. And logically you should think, okay, what is the need? So when it is a spot diagnosis, then there is no need. And spot diagnosis, see, for example, if the patient is coming to you with pain in abdomen and there is strangulated hernia, first of all, you should know that while doing the examination of the patient, you should check for the hernial orifices. Where are the hernial orifices? Okay, so you should see at the umbilicus where there is any hernia. You should see the previous surgical spot. Means any previous incision, previous scar. Okay, whether there is something coming out. Sometimes it will happen that there will be very small border of the intestine will come there. And you may not be able to properly see it. Then you have to carefully palpate it. If the patient is obese, it can be sometimes difficult to palpate also. You should see for the superficial inguinal ring, deep inguinal ring. You should see for the femoral sites, femoral rings. You should see for whether there is any femoral hernia. And when you have seen, you should see for the lumbar areas, lumbar hernias. And when you see that, which are the possible sites for the herniation, when all these sites are normal, if you are not able to find anything, you should also suspect that is there any internal herniation present? Is there any internal herniation? For example, any recently done laparotomy, and after doing laparotomy, patient is giving rise to the symptoms of the intestinal obstruction. You should think whether there is any internal herniation present through the mesentery, through the gap in the mesentery, or through any narrowing. So such kind of the clinical suspicion is very important as far as the diagnosis of intestinal obstruction is concerned. And when you clinically see this, then you can judge. So spot diagnosis, when it is there, it has to be immediately explored. So there is no need of further test. So there lies your clinical sense. And when you feel that, okay, the final diagnosis by means of the clinical examination has to be confirmed, or you have to rule out other diagnosis also. In that condition, there will come the role of the other tests, like maybe biochemical test or maybe the radiological test. And the radiological test and biochemical test can guide you that what can be your diagnosis. Just take the examples, okay, whether it is acute pancreatitis, yes or no, whether it is acute cholecystitis, yes or no, and then whether it is acute appendicitis, yes or no, and then whether it is only related to intestines or intestinal obstruction or intestinal perforation. So such kind of the approach is very much important. Many times you can diagnose things clinically only. So the diagnostic tests are for the further confirmation of the case. So clinical diagnosis is one of the key as far as the intestinal obstruction and intestinal perforation is concerned. And very important thing here in this regard is that while approaching this particular patient, there should not be undue delay in the testing. Now it does mean that what I just told before some time, because if there is intestinal perforation and you are clearly finding there is a gas under diaphragm, and you are seeing the gas under diaphragm, and that is a classic sign of the intestinal perforation. By percussion also you can find the gas under diaphragm, and this by means of this clinical test, rigidity, severe pain in abdomen and the associated symptoms. And when you diagnose, then undue going for the further test may not be necessary. And here what will be the optimum decision to either to go for a laparotomy or a laparoscopy, depending on the whatever the facilities you have and whatever the expertise you have. So once you do the laparotomy or laparoscopy, you can immediately see what is there going on wrong, because you can prevent the further damage. But the condition where there can be some confusion or there is not a completely clear picture, in that condition you can go ahead with the test like CT scan, or if you feel that okay, the surgical intervention can be done after some time, but you need to have certain more details about it as far as the anatomical aspect of the abdominal cavity is concerned. If you want to have certain more details, then in that condition you can go for the further test like CT scan of the abdomen. or if needed HRCT of the thorax, because in diaphragmatic hernia they enter into the thorax. So in that condition you may require the CT scan of the thorax also. But before the CT scan of the thorax, even you can say in the X-ray of the chest, you can see the bowel loops in the thorax. So but if you want to have still more details about that particular internal herniation, then you can definitely go for the CT scan of the abdomen. But it is all a clinical sense you have to use, it is all a clinical judgment you have to use, because the important thing is that whenever you diagnose the patient early, whenever you diagnose the patient in the golden hours, whenever you take the aggressive steps, not over aggressive, but alert, in alert way, aggressive steps in the diagnosis and in the management, and if there is a requirement of surgery, if you do it in time, and if you prevent the further complications like the ARDS or like the renal failure or like the septicemia, then there are very high chances that you may get a good cure rates in the patient, or your patient can be cured very nicely. But if you make a small delay, it can create the irreversible damage to the patient. So first, the clinical approach itself is very important. You should know what is meaning by clinical approach to the patient of intestinal obstruction, and once you know this clinical approach, then the further details, then what is meant by intestinal obstruction, what is meant by intestinal perforation, then what are the causes, what is the treatment, what are the surgeries, that will become the further part of this discussion. Thanks for patient hearing. Thank you.